I hope we have to start focusing on the way that we facilitate the process rather than giving the instructions. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sabih. Apologies for the participants because we are supposed to have a 10-minute break. So we took a couple of minutes from you. So we are on break now and we will be back on 9:50. Thank you.
Thank you. We want to recognize the previous prior learning and his previous experience, and we want him to choose to learn and integrate new information with his prior knowledge. So the main stakeholders in any learning process are three: the instructor, the learner, and the course or the curriculum, as we stated earlier. And I'm going to start by talking about the students and what kind of students do we have in academia and in tertiary education. So there is a model for the students in tertiary education, and that model is called the Susan Robert model. Okay, so Susan is a very intrinsically motivated student, and she is at the university to learn. So she likes to get to the bottom of things, reach understanding. She often reflects on possibilities, implications, applications. You can see these are all higher cognitive skills and consequences of what she is learning. And she is characterized by a preference for deep learning. And I'm going to answer that, what is deep learning, in a few slides, the next few slides. So Susan is characterized by preference to deep learning, and she uses spontaneously her higher cognitive processes. And faced with the curriculum, she comes to the lecture, she teaches herself and comes to the lecture very much ready to the lecture. She knows the basic information and she has prepared her own questions, and she is unstoppable. Nobody can prevent her from learning. She is the example of an academic student. The other type of student is Robert. And I'm sorry they chose the boy, the male gender, to represent this kind of non-academic student. He is extrinsically motivated and not at the university to learn. So Robert doesn't really care about the learning itself. His goal is to have a university degree. He wants to pass exams, get the degree, and get a job. And he's characterized by preference for surface learning or rote learning. And now you can relate to what we said previously. And he only uses his cognitive processes when he has to. So he's not somebody who is not able to learn. He is a person who chooses to use rote learning or memorization in his tertiary education. He will cut short in achieving his goals, and those guys think that if they can collect several blocks or learning blocks from the lecture and memorize these, then they can pass the exams. So he usually his goal with minimum he wants to achieve his goal with minimum effort, and he sticks to lower cognitive activities, that is memorization and identification. So that is, he has a preference or tendency to surface learning. So what is the problem? The problem is that previously, in the good old days, in the 50s and 60s, and I think many of our parents can relate to that, usually the class used to have a few students, and education was very expensive, and those students were very motivated, and they all used to represent what we know about the academic student. Now, when the number of students had increased in a particular year, we started having more of the non-academic students, the Robert model. So what is good teaching? Good teaching is trying your best as an instructor to minimize the difference between the academic learning, the academic learner and the non-academic learner. In another word, you try to engage them, you try to engage the non-academic learner in certain type of activities that encourage him and stimulate him to use his higher cognitive functions. Besides, it is no more possible to say that I taught the student, but he didn't learn. So you cannot claim that the student cannot learn. That is, your role as an instructor in the class is to minimize the difference by, how do we do that? By course alignment and designing outcome-based courses, and aligning our teaching and learning, what is known as constructive alignment. So in a good system, all aspects of teaching, assessment are tuned or is gauged to support high-level learning, so that the students are encouraged to use higher order learning process. And constructive alignments is such kind of a system. It's an approach to course design or curriculum design to give optimal conditions for quality learning. Who is the leader in or who is the founder of this theory? The founder of this theory is John Biggs, and I think he is Australian or New Zealander. I don't recall that fact anymore. And he is adamant that higher education must allow students to construct and learn deeply their understanding of concepts in different ways that is still within the broad structure of the broad structures and the outcomes of the course. These structures, it ranges, or learning ranges from poor understanding to the most desirable outcomes, and that is to achieve deep learning. One of the students in our preparatory sessions for these lectures said something nice, that he said, I want to know what is deep learning. So this is a comparison. I hope these lectures will answer that question. So this is a very basic comparison between surface and deep learning. Surface learning is rote learning. You memorize the ideas, and it's isolated facts, not linked very properly. You do not establish good connections between your ideas. And if some of these ideas gets forgotten, then you pass to the point of non-learning. It's as you didn't pass the university. Formula and procedures, you memorize all that. Student want to pass he does factual recall and just recall the information that is given in the lecture. He must have recorded it or have written some notes. And transmission modes is just the basic information is transmitted as a chain from the instructor to the learner. In deep learning, you make an understanding and you make meaning and relational. And I'll give in the next slide and some kind of an explanation. I'll try to touch on what deep learning means. So the students are curious, interactive, productive, and the teachers use active methods, and the student is able to form connections between the ideas and the concepts that he acquires during the learner process. There is something called structure of observed learning outcomes. And that structure have, 5 stages, from pre-structural and connected ideas to unistructural, simple, like that one here, obvious connections, multi-structural, where there are many connections that are made between the ideas, and relational level, this relational, you relate the part to the whole, and extended abstract, where it goes beyond to generalize the principles. So that is the highest level. So this is we move from unistructural to multistructural, and we are able to establish connections. How do we go about that? If you look into that, this is taken from a paper. It's a kind of student answers, 5 students who are sitting in the same class, and they have, of course, the same prior learning, and they are exposed to that question. And the question is, why is the side of the mountain that faces the coast usually wetter than the side that's facing the interior? So the first answer, he says, where we live it is like this. Everybody knows that it is the case. We go there in summer and it is wet, but not on the other side of the mountain. So he basically repeated what the question had stated. The second answer had added something. He said it's because the sea breeze hits the seaside of the mountain first before they hit the other side. Where we live, it is like this, and then he continues. So he had added one sentence, and so he was able to make more a unistructural relation to the question. The third answer was air from the sea is moist. It has to go up the mountain before it gets to the other side. And if it loses its dampness on the side, it hits first, then there is not much for the other side. So this is why the seaside is the wetter side, and that is multistructural. And then we move to the other person who demonstrate, the 4th student and the 5th student, they demonstrate a more connections and more knowledgeable information, which denotes their ability to integrate ideas and to add their own perception of the question. So we wanted the student to reach that 5th level of integration. And that is what that is the ability to make connection between the ideas and add new knowledge and add his own interpretation of the question. So what is effective teaching? Effective teaching is the one that brings about the intended learning outcomes of the course. And it creates a situation or selecting a lifelike situation to enhance learning. Showing, telling, giving instruction, making someone understand in order to learn, although understanding is a very vague term if you put it in your course design. Imparting knowledge and skills required to master the subject matter. So this is what the effective teaching is. And effective teachers believe that learning occurs primarily as a direct result of individual differences between learners. So, and that's why we have this problem-based inquiry where the students sit and ask to discuss their notes and this small group discussions, because they believe that learning occurs as, like students learn differently. So learning is a result of appropriate teaching, but it's also as a result of individual differences between the students. And learning happens as a result of learning very focused activities. When we design a course, we have to underpin the theories of learning. That's very important. And the ultimate goal of any teaching situation is that the student learn whatever they are supposed to learn. So learning is usually a very vague concept though, and it may refer to both learn about and learn to do. We want in our courses to focus on the outcome, not on the income. So it is not what you want to tell them, the content that you want to teach. or you want them to learn about. It is how about to achieve that. So the outcomes should be always student-centered. So it is what the student should learn. That is the outcome. It's not lecturer focused or lecturer centered. It's not what you want to teach them, it's what you want them to learn. The approach to course design begin with the question, what do we want the student to be able to do as a result of learning? So the intended learning outcomes for the students then become the objectives for designing the curriculum and the course. So we start where do we start with course design? The realistic answer is to start from the beginning. The right answer is to start from the end, and that is the learning outcomes. Very constructive and very useful course design takes place when you align the learning objectives, your learning outcome, your teaching activities, and your assessments. And that is what is known as constructive alignment. How do we do that? First of all, you have to distinguish what kind of knowledge you want them to learn. Is it knowledge about things? A knowledge that we can declare to someone in writing or telling, and whether it is a functional knowledge to put to work, solving physical problem, analyzing, making an argument. So what is the and to which percentage? So for example, in anatomy, you need to have some bit of declarative knowledge. It's not all clinically applied knowledge. So you want a declarative knowledge. You want the student to know a bit. So you decide on that. How much do you want him to rote learn, and how much application do you want him to have? So the course design, you have to learn when you define the intended learning outcome. That's the end part of the course, or the end result of the course. You need to know where the course is going, because otherwise you will not go anywhere. So you have to have a vision for the course. So you define the intended learning outcome, and the way to define that, you define the contents, and you define how deep the student needs to learn the contents. So the way to do that is to use the active action verbs that is listed in Bloom's taxonomy. And you create a learning environment that is likely to engage the student through very much aligned learning activities to help to bring about the intended learning outcomes. So it is not only the learning outcomes, you have to design the activities of the course. And the last thing is to use certain assessment tasks to see whether the student has achieved the intended learning outcome. And these kind of course, this judgment can be either obtained through formative assessment throughout the course, and then you can also use it through summative assessment. Dr. Sabih will talk about that in his lecture. So the constructive alignment of the course is the first thing. It starts, you can see that the block is, it has that thick line around it. So that starts with your intended learning outcome. So you decide on how good you want to know this intended learning outcome. Highly satisfactory, moderately satisfactory. You decide the level of learning. You can see this from deep to more superficial. This is how you decide on the level of cognition and how deep you want to know each of these contents of the course. How do you do that? You also design after deciding on that, you design learning activities that align with the intended learning outcomes, and then you design assessment tasks that align with the intended learning outcomes and the teaching and learning activities. let's put that into a chart that is, I think it will help you to understand. So the knowledge has 4 types. There is 4 basic types of knowledge that you want your medical and science students to know. And these are the factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, concepts as in physiology, factual knowledge as in anatomy. Physiology is more conceptual. That's like students do not like it as much as anatomy. Anatomy allows rote learning, so they can get away with it. Procedural knowledge and metacognitive knowledge. And these are the action verbs that is noted from in Bloom's taxonomy from the least complex to the more complex. So if you see, if I'm teaching first year and second year students, so I want my learning outcomes to be very much towards the lower cognitive level. I mean, I'm not going to ask the student to create and analyze in first year. He will start crying in the exam. So you start with the lower cognitive functions. You test the lower cognitive function, and you design a teaching activity that slightly exceed that level. So if my learning outcomes involves remembering and understanding, my teaching and learning activities should include applying this information that he learned in the lecture. So I move a little bit with the cognition, and then the assessment task should go very much parallel to the learning activity or slightly higher. As I told you, you have to train the student to gradually, when you give him a high cognition learning activity, the students do not feel, they feel overwhelmed and they feel angry and anxious if you bring a question, then it entails higher cognition, while your intended learning outcome states that he has to learn it at a particular level, like applying. These 3 levels, the analysis, the evaluation, and the creation, is not very much used in medical education. And that's why you got very overwhelmed when I submitted the assignment to you, because I'm trying to push you to that level here. So this is something that you train the student on gradually, and the ultimate aim of your education is to push the student towards deep learning, because that is when he will be able to criticize, critically think, and he can construct new knowledge. In addition, while you're moving him from, in a nutshell, you're moving him from being non-academic to a highly academic student. The course design is very much similar to a clothesline. And why do we represent it by a clothesline? Because these things, or the clothes that is hung on a wash line, you can usually change the sequence of it and test its validity and relevance. And you can keep what is valid and discard what you find or deemed irrelevant, or it loses its validity with time. So it is something that is very much liable for change. So the way to do that is to identify the student prior knowledge. As I said, you can have many students who are coming from secondary education, grade 12, but their prior knowledge varies. And in all these informal sessions and group discussion, we try to test the prior knowledge. Now you would ask, how do we test the prior knowledge? For example, I'm teaching the nervous system, then I give these sticker papers, something like this yellow piece of paper, and I ask each student to write 5 concepts on the nervous system. And then I would be able to assess what they know about the nervous system before I start explaining the nervous system. So, and there, I'm sure you know that there are certain topics in that is a bit neglected in secondary school education, like the lymphatic system, for example. So there, you test the prior knowledge of the student, and then you introduce a new material that facilitate meaningful learning. And what does that mean here? Meaningful learning means the integration of the new learned material with his prior knowledge, because it's highly likely that he chooses non-learning and then he sticks to his prior knowledge. So you need to encourage the student to integrate the newly taught material with the old one. And that is what is all about designing a proper course. So where to start? You can see I put the intended learning outcome, and that's the end. So you start from the end. And then you start establishing the units in your course design. So of course, you are going to document the change that happened through the process, through your assessments. And without measuring the prior learning, the teaching is locked up in a structure of terminology that is not accessible to the student. So the student has these building blocks and he has to build on it. If he cannot relate what you are teaching him to his prior knowledge or built on it, then you're not achieving what you are intended from the course.
عفوا دكتورة سحر إذا تسمحي لي بس ممكن تكبرين اكو ريكوست من الاودينس you're doing full screen. اكو هذا الكأس اللي موجود عندك إذا ترجعين على
Did I end show and start again?
اكو لا هو كأس جوا موجود إذا تدوسين عليه تصير فول سكرين لأنه الفيو صغير دا يبين عندنا.
دكتورة غيري البرزنتر فيو يعني end show واختاري غير فيو.
أي هو هذا اللي راح يصير. view normal.
دكتورة هذا اللي يم التصغير والتكبير على الجهة اليمين أقصى اليمين اللي جوا.
دكتورة سحر أسفل شيء هذا الكأس هذا الكأس لا بعد روحي to the left هذا الكأس that's it
هذا
yes
okay full screen. So what is the prior knowledge that is what the student have learned or achieved in their usually grade 12 secondary education, and where you want them to be, that is your intended learning outcome. And that the point between these two is your transformation, that is the learning process or the zone of proximal development. We said that we want the student to reach that stage with the most knowledgeable other to be an independent learner and to establish the connection, the proper connection. So this is a very good model of teaching and learning. If you can see the teacher, the expert, and he presents the information, of course, in a lecture, but you have to remember that it's not only the lecture that is there. You can design, there is a lot of properly designed teaching and learning activities that can help the lecturer and help the student in emerging from emerging as an expert from being a novice. So the novice is the beginner, and he emerges as an expert or an emerging expert, not a full expert. That means that he will be able to establish some connections between these learning blocks. So as opposed to the other model, when he always decide to learn by rote learning, and then of course this is the same narrated chain that he had learned from the lecturer, and which he will tend to forget over time, or sometimes he would forget some of the blocks of that knowledge, and then it's very similar to it is as non-learning. So where their prior knowledge and where do we want them to be, that's the intended learning outcome. And then we start, why it's called the wash line, we start putting these units across the wash line. So, and these units are, of course, they are not fixed. You can change the arrangement of these units. And also with each unit, you can decide how deep that you want the student to learn the topic. So this is basically, each unit will form a particular topic or a particular content. And then you start by doing the subunits. You decide on the contents of subunit. you build the course material, you build the teaching and learning activities, and you build the assessment tasks for each unit. Of course, all this should be aligned. So the intended learning outcome should align with your teaching and learning activity, and it should align with your assessments. So the what do we mean alignment? We mean that we test at the same level or slightly higher. This is an outcome-based approach to learning. We define the outcome to the students because we think that defining the outcome to the students will encourage the students to learn. So teaching to facilitate attaining the learning object outcomes. Usually it is what are the students has to do, the intended learning outcomes, and assessment how well the student has attained the intended learning outcomes. So you put your learning outcomes, that is it's the end of the process in itself, but we use it as a start, and you design your teaching to align with the intended learning outcome, and you design your assessment to align with your intended learning outcome. So and this, how do we define that? We define that by the verbs. So the action verbs. One word, don't use, one advice, don't use vague verbs like understand. Understand is not really a very definitive verb. It can mean many things. So we use a more defined verbs that can measure the intended learning outcome. So the intended learning outcome should be well defined and measurable. You can measure it. And you state what the students are expected to be able to do after studying the course program. It's always expressed from the student perspective. You can look at that when you, this is one or two of the lectures, I think I projected that earlier. And you can see here when we write the learning outcome, we say the student should be able to describe, identify, list, learn. So you show in your lecture, you spell very well the intended learning outcome. So what information you want him to know and at which level you want him to know. And of course, this intended learning outcome and the action verb should entail higher cognitive levels as when your study advances. So the course that you design to first-year students and second-year students will include a lot of list and describe, while when you are at your final years, you need the student to be able to construct and analyze. So you aim higher with your course design. Of course, the intended learning outcomes is very much related to the criteria for assessing the student. There is, of course, you have to align also your course intended learning outcome with the program intended learning outcome. How does that happen? Usually the staff members, the teaching staff members meet and check whether the courses are aligned. There is vertical alignment and horizontal alignment with the program of the program that is the medical program that is taught in medical universities. And we check also, is the weighing appropriate for the course? Usually 1 credit hour is 10 hours of course activity. So if the course is 10 credits, you must have 100 hours of course activity. And if it is 20 credits, that's 200 hours of course activities. So your course should reflect that the credits should be very much related. The weighing is appropriate and the credits are related to the course activities. Is there any gaps? For example, when I looked into this course in medical education, I decided that I'm going to talk about concept mapping somewhere in my lectures because I didn't see it very apparent on the program. So I said to myself, okay, I'm going to explain it in 1-2 slides and maybe my colleagues can add to that. So the procedure in designing the course intended learning outcome, decide on what knowledge is to be taught. Sorry, I'm repeating that because it's very important to know that, whether it's functional knowledge or declarative knowledge. Select the topics that is taught, all the units. These are the topics or the contents, but you don't project the course as just list of contents. That's not okay, because that will confuse the student. He will be overwhelmed. He won't know what to learn. You have to be specific and define your intended learning outcome through the use of action verbs. You have to spell out what he needs to learn. So decide on the level of understanding, performance of the student expected to achieve, and consider if all the learning outcomes are of equal importance. Ensure a clear understanding of the agreement on the intended learning outcome. And the last thing is you have to communicate that to the students. And I'm going to show you now how to communicate that to the students at the end of this lecture. So designing teaching and learning activity to align with the intended learning outcome. So when I gave you the lecture on the literature review, my learning activity was a bit higher than the intended learning outcome. If you have noticed, the intended learning outcome was somehow in the middle. The designed assignment is slightly higher to keep you in that zone of proximal development. And I think I am allowed to do that because most of you are final years medical students. So you have moved with your education. The best to do this is to activate the verbs or the learning activities intended for the learning outcome. So you can be parallel and you can go slightly above, but you cannot go below. When you design your teaching and learning activity, all these teaching and learning activity can be used as an assessment method. So they would describe, you can give reading for the student, you can give a lecture followed by a presentation, explain, tutorial, written essay, he can write an essay to explain, integrate, project, assignment, apply, project, case study, solve a problem, that is problem-based learning, case study, design and create, project, creative writing, and hypothesize an experiment or a project, and reflect a reflective diary. So all these are teaching and learning activities, and there are many, many more. And these teaching and learning activities can also use as a way to assess the students. We usually give marks to the projects. Sometimes it's part of our formative learning, and although it is not advisable to give marks for the formative assessment, but we give a few marks for the projects as to motivate the students to do the project. So we provide the students, the assessment task provide the students the opportunity to demonstrate what they have achieved and to what level their performance is. So I asked Umnia to ask you all to attempt to the assignment. It is so that we learn through our differences, and there is no single right answer. Some students will come with answers that I don't know myself or never thought about. So this is the assessment task should be very appropriately designed, and different assessment methods addresses different intended learning outcome. So it's better to have several kinds of tasks. So it's not enough, for example, to give him an essay that it talks to his writing abilities, but maybe you need more types of formative assessment like MCQs and to test his understanding and depth of understanding of the course. And of course, when you design the assessment task, this will help you to judge the student performance. Although there are many education systems that has moved away from the assessment. So the assessment only happens at grade 12 at the final levels of whether primary or secondary education. But I think it is also a form of behaviorism because it is associated with marks. So punishment and reward, and most of the education systems are trying to move away from that. But the assessment gives you, if it is well designed, not any assessment, it can give you an idea of how much grasping of the topic has done. So that is the way to design a bad assessment. So if the teacher intention is to construct and analyze as it is stated in the course design, and this is the student activity is to name and recite, that is what he learned, rote learning, just rote learning. So he uses lower cognitive function. And if you bring him to name and recite while you ask him to, in the course design, to construct and analyze, you are encouraging surface learning. So the students who are the academic students will not be very happy with such type of a test because they will pass it easily. The non-academic student will pass, but you are encouraging them now to practice and continue on doing what they are doing. So if the teacher intention as stated in the module organizer is to construct and analyze, and the student learning is to construct and analyze. The academic student can construct and analyze, and then you bring questions at the same level that will encourage deep learning. So your intention is conducted through the course design and also through the teaching activities. So your teaching activities should help the student to construct and analyze the knowledge. So, and then when you test the student, you prepare an assessment. The assessment should be set at the same level of the intended learning outcomes, because that is what encourages deep learning. You stimulate the student to adopt deep learning. And I remember in one of the medical schools, in one of the countries that I taught in, for the first assessment, the success rate was 30%. And then the head of department was not very happy. So, and then he came to ask me about that. And I said, just wait until the end of the year. And the students' the success rate increased to 70% in the mid-year exam. And finally, it was 95%. Because now the students learn that this is, I don't want them to just memorize. I don't want the rote learning. My questions are at a higher level than that. So we try slowly but surely encourage the student to think and think deeply. I must say that I was overwhelmed by the number of the students when I taught at Baghdad Medical School. I mean, I remember we were 360, but I haven't taught 360 students in one hall for some time now. So what is the problem with that type of a class? The problem with it is there is a lack of opportunity for student questions. The interaction between the student and the lecturer is very minimal. So there is a real difficulty in achieving student-centered learning. And the lack of tools with which you can measure the student learning quality. I mean, clickers will be very useful in this type. There is something that the student can use with their mobile called Polls Everywhere. So it's very similar to the clickers. So the lecturer can project some MCQs for these high classes and see whether they have mastered the contents of the lecture and the concepts that he wants them to master at which level. The other way is to you show that your intentions to the student is through something called concept mapping. And I said to you in the beginning that I looked into the course and I found that it wasn't mentioned anywhere, so I decided to explain it. So this concept mapping is one of the ways to achieve meaningful learning and cross quality in larger classes or larger groups. What is concept mapping? It is mapping out the knowledge structure or the key concepts of the module. So you actually show the student your vision of the module or the path and what you want them to achieve. So the teachers map their understanding of the topic to give the students an access to the complexity and the richness of the knowledge. So you are basically drawing this connection between the blocks. It's like a mind map, and it will enrich their simple narrative explanation. So what is a concept map? This is a concept map to show what the concept map is. So a concept map helps to explain the intended learning outcome. We said that each course has an intended learning outcomes, and these are the outcomes that you want the student to achieve by the end of the course. So the concept map represents organized knowledge, and it looks very much similar to what you are looking at. So it helps to answer the focus questions of the course, and are context dependent, and it helps in effective learning and effective teaching. So what happens, the concept map can learn the concepts or what the teacher wants the student to learn, but you can also ask the student at the end of the course to construct a concept map of what he understood from that course, or what did he understood, and what was what did he achieve from the course. So he shows his learning outcome and how much did he master of, what is the mastery of the contents. So it comprises of concepts, and it is linked by linking words. And so you basically, it's a map, it's a mind map, and a design for your course. And they can be used for the identification of a prior knowledge structure. So like, for example, you're telling the student the nervous system, which is made of the nerve cell, and then the nerve cell is related or communicate with other nerve cell, and then it forms, this forms the nervous system, and then you put more blocks to the function of the nervous system, and that is, you link all the information. So you establish blocks of knowledge, and you link it through linking verbs, and these verbs are represented on the arrows. So in a mind map or in a concept map, you show him what are you going to teach him, and where is this course going to. So it serves for identifying the prior knowledge structure, because at the beginning of your course, you can give the student, as I said, stickers, but you can also teach him how to do a concept map and ask him to draw what he knows about the nervous system. How can he represent his knowledge of the nervous system? So you can identify his prior knowledge, and you maybe whenever he learns a new topic regarding the nervous system, he adds blocks to this mind map. So the presentation of a new material in a way that facilitates meaningful learning. We usually can put they ask us in our courses to put a concept map in the beginning of each module to show where the actual understanding of the course, and usually the student requests that they want that concept maps. It helps them in understanding where the course is going. Sharing of expert knowledge and the connection. So what you fail to present in the lecture, and these are the connections, you are sharing that in the concept map. So you document knowledge change to show the integration of student prior knowledge and where the teaching is leading him to. Okay, so that's the final slide in my presentation. I think I can get some water now. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Dr. Sahar. So as always, your presentations are the dearest to my heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I'll be selfish and I'll ask you a question first before the participants. So
okay.
This module is about learning, right? And learning is important. And actually, Leonardo da Vinci has said, learning never exhausts the mind. So can you give us the students, a piece of advice that you personally regard as important regarding learning?
I think one of the piece.
Stop sharing the screen, please.
Okay. Okay, we're back.
Okay, very good.
I think one of the piece advices is that I do that sometimes when you're studying and you know the medical curriculum is a heavy curriculum, and then when you face something that you don't understand very well, you attempt to rote learning. You might just memorize the slide. And you might think this is not grave. In our university, it's grave. I've seen students who memorize math questions. So it is, don't be tempted to memorize. Whatever you don't understand, try to dig deeply and learn the basis behind it. On the other hand, we have many lecturers who give classes to grade 12 students. And in these classes, they teach them the basic concepts. They don't solve problems with them. So they think if the basic concepts are mastered, you can solve anything. And when I went to the States in Missouri, there is a class which tackles the concepts of engineering, and they administer it to 4-year-old children. So, for example, you don't need to know that the area of a circle is half نصف القطر تربيع في النسبة الثابتة. They teach them how did that happen? How did they get to that conclusion or that equation? So understanding the basics is very important. It helps in establishing all these connections.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sahar. Indeed. Okay, so dear participants, your comments and your questions are all welcome. So you can just type them down in the chat box or raise your hand and unmute yourself right away. Okay, so Dr. Mustafa Abbas, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Omnia, and thank you so much for Dr. Sahar. I have a question about your comment. You said that people like in other countries know what is the knowledge behind the natural science. How can we put that thing in our countries? I mean, is it that hard to learn the things behind the basic sciences? Because I think we lack this knowledge, as we only like learn and study the hard and complex things, and we forget to know and study what is the principle behind the basic knowledge in whatever the science was, medicine or engineering or whatever the science. So what do you think, how could we implement this type of learning in our curriculum or in our life?
It needs more time and effort dedicated for that. This is the problem. You know, it needs more time that is dedicated to teaching and learning. So these are done by experts, and it targets younger age group, and they start with the basic concepts or the background behind basic theories, basic equations, but it really creates a powerful thinker. Because once you understand the basis of the questions, I mean, I know somebody who was one of our academic professors, and he used to teach grade 12, and he doesn't solve the problems with them. He just teach them the basics of physics and the basics of maths and chemistry, and how these basics are constructed. And and he thinks this is the way. It's instead of making them solve the problem, understand the basic knowledge behind it. Needs time and effort, and it needs a more staff recruitment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sahar and Mustafa. So any other questions or comments?
Omnia, if you allow me just to have...
Yes, Dr. Hilal, go ahead.
أنا أعتقد الموضوع يعني يجب أن يؤخذ بجدية، خصوصا من طلاب كليات الطب والأطباء المتخرجين جدد. راح أتكلم بالعربي حتى تكون شوية الأمور أقرب. موضوع الفهم وعدم الاعتماد على الدرخ وعلى الميموري وتذكر المعلومة فقط. من نحاول نغير هذا الموضوع، نشوف اكو ريزيستنس، وهذا الريزيستنس تاتي من عده اطراف. تاتي من الطلاب اولا، لانه هم يعتقدون بانه اسهل طريقه للقرايه مثل ما تعلموها بالثانويه هي الميمورايزيشن والحفظ او الدرخ، وبالتالي يعني they can pass and get high marks by this methods. في نفس الوقت faculty members, not all of them are trained on the new theories and concepts of learning, teaching and learning, and therefore they are resistant to design a course like Dr. Sahar elegantly demonstrated, is that we start from the end. This is the graduate from a medical school. ما هي المواصفات التي يجب أن تتوفر في هذا الخريج، وبالتالي أحددها، وبالتالي تكون على شكل outcomes, intended learning outcomes، وتتحول إلى learning objectives، وبعدين أستخدم الماتيريال اللي أوصل الطالب لهاي learning outcomes، وأختار طرائق التدريس المناسبة، وأختار طريقة الأسسمنت المناسبة اللي دكتورة سحر ذكرتها بالconstructive alignment. إحنا غايتنا من هاي الكورسات واللي هي for the first time addressing medical students is that إنه الطالب هو صاحب الشأن وصاحب القضية في هذا الموضوع. يجب عليه أن يدرك أنه الموضوع يحتاج إلى أنه فهم، يحتاج إلى أنه يطبق، يحتاج يربط المعلومة البيزك ويا المعلومة الكلينيكال، ويعرف أهمية المعلومة البيزكس شنو تفيده من يصير صف رابع وصف خامس وصف سادس. وبالتالي هو صاحب القضية ويتبنى هاي القضية ويدفع باتجاهها. هي هاي الفكرة حقيقة من إقامة هاي الكورسات. البرزنتيشن كان بديع جدا، عاشت إيديش دكتورة سحر، وأيضا كان المودريشن من أمنية. as usual it was perfect. شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hilal. So, sorry, Dr. Sahar. Before we close, Dr. Yasser has a question. In our course, which learning theory do we depend on?
All of them are valid. You can decide on which theory that serves you the most. Maybe if you are, for example, I'm teaching anatomy, I still need some rote learning, some behaviorism, and some cognitivism. So because my course doesn't allow a lot of constructivism, if you understand what I mean. So it depends on which theory serves you. If you are doing engineering, then constructivism is the theory that serves you the most. So it depends on the discipline. It's very much discipline oriented, but all the four theories are valid. So however, behaviorism should not be encouraged. Why? As Dr. Hilal said, we don't إياكم ثم إياكم ثم إياكم من الاعتماد على الميمورايزيشن والحفظ. ليش السبب؟ لأنه هذا أولاً it's not very much adopted in the West. Then you will, if you base your knowledge on memorization, you will be bombarded with the questions that you cannot answer. So be ready. I can give an example for that. Suppose you're learning about lymphedema, and you know that lymphedema is a limb enlargement as a result, or can be either primary, hereditary, and then secondary due to parasitic infection or surgery. Then one of the, and you are presenting, and of course that is what your professor told you, who also comes from a behaviorism system. And then one of the audience raises his hand and he asks you, but he tells you, I know two patients, both of them had the same extent of the cancer, and they both of them had undergone the same operation, but one developed lymphedema and the second one didn't develop lymphedema. So why? So you have to, here you will be challenged, because you will need a very much extensive basic knowledge and basic background and knowledge of research to be able to answer that to his question. So that is why we don't encourage behaviorism and rote learning.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sahar. So I guess we have approached the end of today's session. Thank you so much for attending today. Feel free to reach us through all social media if you have a question in mind. We hope that you have learned something new today. Learning is a lifestyle, so keep learning and keep growing. And we are looking forward to seeing you tomorrow with 2 extinguished psychiatrists talking about the active and passive learning and learning style. So thank you so much.
Thank you to all.
شكرا جزيلا أبدعتم.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور.
شكرا أمنية. شكرا
لكم جميعا.